I launched this product about in 2017. It took me about 3 weeks to build, and it made about $2,000 in revenue. We'll talk about MetaShort a little bit later, though. So, what did all of these products have in common? The code was ugly. I'm a developer full-time. This stuff I would be ashamed of. I wouldn't want any of my colleagues to see the code I wrote. There was no linting, there were no unit tests. It just worked, though. They weren't built to scale. If my users went up, my servers went down. And I didn't use whatever hipster framework that was out at the time. They weren't built with React or Vue or Laravel. They were built with PHP, inline SQL queries, and a little bit of jQuery if I was feeling feisty. But most importantly, I shipped them. All those products, I launched to the internet, and I had users that were actively using them. If you're building a new idea, you want to get it to market as fast as you can. So the absolute best thing you can do is ignore all of those new fads, frameworks, and fancy patterns. Instead, just use whatever makes the cut. This quote's from a guy named Owen Williams. He runs 2 startups. He built both of them using PHP and jQuery, and he doesn't need a day job. They make him enough money to sustain him. There's a difference between what we do in our 9 to 5 and what we do in our free time. I'm a consultant, so during my daily job, I need to make the best recommendations in terms of technology, stack, your build processes. I have to have good code quality. I need, the next developer that works on it not to kill me. But if I worried about all that stuff in my free time when I'm just trying to build a project, I would never get anything done. Most of us can spend maybe 3 hours a week working on a side project. So you really have to focus on building and not tests and scaling and frameworks. This is my GitHub. 42 repositories. Most of those are dead projects. I feel like a lot of us have the same kind of thing. My GitHub's filled with everything from GitHub-based e-commerce to Tinder for cats. Most of these projects never saw the light of day simply because I got so caught up with the small stuff that I just got overwhelmed and I gave up. So let's look at some obituaries here. Gitgate. The idea behind Gitgate was that I would charge you access to access private GitHub repositories. So say you wrote a tutorial on Laravel, and someone's like, oh, that's really cool, but I want to see some actual code. So you could charge $5 at the end of the tutorial. Someone could pay that and get access to the code. You could do all that through GitHub. Well, I got too carried away with the design. Don't laugh, it looks like shit, I know. But that's because I went through so many iterations. I think at one point it did look good. But I spent probably a month just like, I gotta move this button a little bit. I gotta have a background because that's cool. Maybe some good animations. In the end, that's all I have. And I was using it to learn serverless technology. That's the hip, cool thing. Who needs backend developers anymore? Sorry for any backend developers. But I got to the point where I felt pretty comfortable with serverless. And I lost motivation to actually finish the project I was building. It's like, I know this stuff. It's not really interesting anymore. Open Attic. So the idea behind this was we all have, video games or DVDs or cassettes, if you're like old school, laying around in our attic. And this would be a platform where people in your community could request to borrow those from you. And you could lend them out, and it'd be all handled through Open Attic. I built this with a team. 3 people, back-end developer, me, a front-end developer, and a designer, the dream team. The back-end developer spent his time thinking, well, we gotta get Azure DevOps, and we have to have our CI build pipeline. It needs to run our tests. We should probably have some automated regression testing. The designer was like, okay, so we need a mobile design. We need it to be responsive. I'm gonna give desktop and mobile. I'm gonna have interactive wireframes. You can see all the animations we'll have on every page. And me, okay, well, we're gonna use React. We're gonna have all these awesome unit tests. We're gonna use state management, Redux. It's gonna be amazing. That is what we released, that screenshot. Finally, link pull. This is one of my more recent failures. I went crazy with the homepage design. This one I just put in here to show that I can actually do some design once in a while. But I spent so much time on this because I was like, okay, well, people are going to get to the website. I need to really grab them, or they're not going to find out what link pull is. Well, it turns out if you don't release anything, that doesn't really matter. And again, I use this as a learning project. I was trying to learn Laravel. I'm old school, I like PHP. And I went through all these tutorials. It was really cool. It was like, well, I don't really want to do link pull anymore. How to be a serial non-shipper. Come up with an idea, build a quick prototype, a ton of features that you know people are going to want. You get to a half-baked 2.0, somebody released a 0.1 version. Shit. So before spending too much time building, make sure people actually want what you're building. The most important thing is to get your product in front of users as early as possible. And also, you need tangible progress for your own sanity. If you're 4 months into something and you still haven't released it, you can get exhausted, especially as, you know, a lot of us have day jobs. Doing this in our free time, you've got to have something out there. And it's really helpful if you have people using that are encouraging you along the way. Does anyone here know Peter Levels? Got a couple of hands, cool. So Peter Levels is pretty popular in the maker digital nomad community. But he has a couple sites that he built. One of them, Remote OK, is a single PHP site that generates over $2,000 a day. One PHP file. Now, I'm not saying you have to shove all your code into one PHP file. That's kind of insane. But if that's what you're comfortable with, go for it. There's nothing wrong with it. And by releasing something, that's better than the person that was building it as a single page application in React with Redux that never released it. Use what you're most familiar with. Because if you're trying to use a framework that you're not completely familiar with, any little obstacle or road bump, that's going to demotivate you. And after enough of those, you're just going to give up on the project. There's a time for learning and a time for building. Iterating on what I said. It's great to learn. In the tech field, you have to or you'll get left behind. You should always try to leave your comfort zone. You know, as a consultant, I need to keep up to date on all the different tools so I can make informed recommendations to my clients. But when I'm building a product, that's not the time for learning. That's the time for getting shit done and releasing it. Make it usable, but don't get too carried away with the design. Don't make the mistake I did with link pull. You need something that users can come in, get an idea of what it's about, and give you money. That's the most important thing. If people aren't willing to give you money, well, they're not really interested in your product. So at the end of the day, it's not going to matter how it looks if you never release it. So build something usable and let users and analytics inform your decisions going forward. When I was building MetaShort, I thought, oh yeah, everyone's going to need all these different meta tags. So of course you have the title, the description, and image, but you're going to need the open graph tags. You're going to need the Twitter card size. You're going to need all this different stuff. After launching MetaShort, looking through the data, 90% of people added a title and an image, and that's it. The rest of it was actually confusing my users because there were so many options. And there are all these tags that people have never heard about. You know, these are social media marketers. They don't know what OG:image is. They know what a title is, though. So let your users tell you what to do. So, how do I build a product? I'm going to look at MetaShort as a case study. So, like I said, MetaShort was built in 3 weeks. It was built with PHP. No, it wasn't a single file. There were like 10 of them. And it was using jQuery, no fancy JavaScript. It starts with the problem. So how did I come up with Metashore? Well, in one of my previous positions, I worked with a social media marketer, and she would go through our CMS, and she would post pages that were created by other departments inside. I worked for the university, so they were created by different departments within the college. And she would post pages, and sometimes they would look like this. I have an obsession with cats. But she would post about a cat festival, let's say, and the title is Cat Festival. Description, Cat Festival. Awesome. The image, there's nothing. I'm not going to click on that if you see it on Twitter. You're just going to keep scrolling by. And then she'd be like, okay, well, there's no meta tags on this. So she would submit a request to us, the development department. The request would go in our backlog. Maybe a week or two later, like, oh yeah, we should work on this. We spend a week on it. And week after that, we finally get to deploy to production. You know what, the Cat Festival's already over. So this is what I came up with as my MVP plan. I didn't even do all these things before I launched them. But the important parts were, I can visit metashore.co. I can enter a URL and I get a shorter version back. I can specify a title, a description, an image, and I can purchase a membership. Step 2, development. So, like I said, I was a PHP developer at the time, so I did this in PHP. I had my SQL queries write a PHP file as well as my HTML. It was nasty, but it worked. For the front-end stuff, I used CodeKit. Instead of setting up Webpack and some kind of build process and stuff, you just drop files in CodeKit, does all that magic for you, and out comes code. And for deployment, I went with the easiest solution. It wasn't necessarily the cheapest, but it was the solution that let me take my files, drag them, FTP them to my server, 10 minutes later, site's live. Three weeks later, I was done with development. I had an MVP that I felt people would get value out of. So I got ready for launch. I promoted my product to Twitter. All 20 of my followers loved it. I used Product Hunt Ship to gain initial traction. Product Hunt Ship is a service where you create a landing page. You're like, hey, I'm building this awesome thing. And people can be like, yeah, that sounds really cool, and they give you their email address. So I did that when I started development. Got about 120 people on that list, and when I decided to launch, I emailed them like, hey, I'm live, go check it out. And finally, I launched it on Product Hunt itself. For those of you that don't know, Product Hunt is like the de facto website for startup launches and just random products. There's a lot of traffic going through Product Hunt, like all of Silicon Valley checks it every day, so it's a pretty good place to launch. This was my launch day. Over 600 upvotes. I was number 3 on the page, which was kind of impressive, not to brag. No. And I had a lot of comments and people emailing me. It was amazing. People were actually excited about it. One of the people in the comments was saying she was going to use it for a class. It's a college class on social media. And she was going to use this as like a demonstration. My analytics, day 1, 1.3 thousand people. The next day it was around 1,000 people, and that traffic was pretty steady for about a week. Got lots of customer interaction through the website chat, tweeting me, articles were talking about it, people were emailing me. It was awesome to be engaged with my users and figure out how this was working for them. And looking at the data, hundreds of people were submitting links daily. But only one user subscribed to the premium. So there was something wrong. Somehow my sales funnel wasn't operating. That's where step 4 comes in, iteration. Talk to your users. This is honestly the hardest part. Building the product took me 3 weeks. I thought I had an idea of what people wanted. And I was pretty close, but I didn't get everything right. People were getting overwhelmed on my editor. There was, too much text on my front page. I was missing some features that people wanted, and instead I built features that people didn't want. So it's really important to keep an open line of communication. Reach out to your users. Even the people that don't reach out to you, if you're collecting email addresses, make sure it's okay, you have some kind of terms of service, but try to reach out to your users and see, what's working for them. Like, I saw you use this last week. You haven't used it since then. What's going on? And also, make sure to read in between the lines. If you have a user that checks out your site and they're like, it's really cool, but I don't think it's really for me. Well, there's something wrong there. So you were interested enough to go check out the site. So obviously something appealed about it. But then you got to the site and you're like, oh no, this isn't targeted at me. Was the wording, did it exclude you some reason? Did it make it seem too complicated, or did it make it seem like it was for a different target audience? That's your problem as the developer. You need to figure out, it's easy to say, oh, that person's not my target group. Well, they went to the site in the first place. So figure out why they felt they didn't need your product. So, you're gonna have good days. This was one of my happiest emails. Someone emailed me and they were like, I love your product and trying my best to promote your baby. Congratulations for your win at Product Hunt. Looking forward to the bright future of Metashort. This feels really good and it gives you a lot of motivation. You're gonna have bad days too though. This guy was a little angry. So it turned out there was a bug in my billing process. The bug being you couldn't cancel your subscription, and I charged him 3 months after you tried to cancel. But you know what? Both these users are equally valuable. They both used your product, and they both have feedback about it. So if you're able to de-escalate the situation enough to actually talk to this person, I'm sure he has a lot of valuable advice about why he quit your product. At the end of the day, not all ideas are good. You need to know when to throw in the towel. Sometimes your idea doesn't gain traction, and you know what, that's fine. You might have thought, the solution you're providing is something people really need, and then people just aren't really interested, or people aren't converting. For Metashort, I had this premium plan, but people were just using the free plan, and I couldn't find a way to entice people enough to pay for it. But the most important thing is don't get too emotionally involved in the stuff you create. Because you really need to know, hey, this isn't working out, the analytics aren't working, people aren't converting. I need to walk away and try again. That's when I shut down Metashort. So Metashort lasted for a little under a year. It was still getting a few hundred active users a day. There was a news agency that was using it in India. People were interested, but they weren't interested enough to pay for it. Also, while I was traveling in China without a laptop, I had server issues. That happened for about 2 weeks. I lost some of my top paying customers. And finally, I built a service that relied on other services. My whole thing was you can change your title, description, or image on Twitter and Facebook. Turns out Twitter didn't like that too much. Something about fake news. So they blocked me. Kind of hard to get around that problem. So I had to let go of Metashort. You need to know to try again. I'm really realizing that I have a lot of cat stuff in here, much more than I thought. Maybe I should try again with the Tinder for cats. So although Metashort didn't work out for me, I've already started working on the next idea, and the next, and the next. You just have to constantly create. Never get discouraged. There are going to be people that don't like your product, don't find it useful, think it's terrible. There'll be people that like it, think it's really good. But at the end of the day, just create products. And you're going to find something that sticks. So go out there and build something cool. Be a maker. Take off your developer, designer, researcher hats and just get building. Focus on what you're familiar with. You don't have to use the coolest new framework to be a real developer. Just build shit. Launch and validate early. Iterate. Talk to your customers. They're going to be the ones providing really valuable feedback that you can then use to further your product. And finally, if it doesn't work out, if the analytics don't support it, try again. Build something else. Know when to move on. So, I'm Alex White. This is my Twitter. Go out there, build something, tweet it at me, and I'll advertise my new products to you as well. Any questions?
How do you personally separate your learning projects from your building projects?
Honestly, it's not easy at all. I give this advice of separating them, but there's a lot of times I find myself, I'm like, oh shit, I'm just doing this to learn, aren't I? And you know, that's okay, but you have to realize that you're not going to finish the idea you're working on probably. If it's an idea you're really passionate about, just kind of set it aside, and then once there's no new framework you want to try out, start working on that.
How do you go about building a large project that you're really passionate about, but you know you have to have, it's going to take a lot more work than probably could even do?
Yeah, so what I try to do is take out the pieces that are going to be the most important. Sometimes that's not always possible, but if it is, find a few features that you think are the most important and get people involved early in your product building phase. You could just have a launch phase, get people on that. Once you have a little bit more going on, get people on that. And as you're going, people are going to be able to kind of help pave your path for you. And at the same time, when you're building a really large scale project like that, just make sure it's not large because you're like, oh, well in the future I'm going to have to do this, I'm going to have to scale, I'm going to need these features. Make sure it's large because it actually has to be. Justin Jackson? I don't know that. Is that in Columbus?
No, it's from Canada, but he's really big. He launched the transistor half campus.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I do follow him on Twitter.
He's also like all like a lot of stuff.
Okay, yeah. I've got so many makers on my Twitter that it's really hard to keep track.
I like this. He has a good way of thinking about products.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely check him out. Thank you.
Do you find that the habits of your night work with PHP and Steady Code drift over into your day job?
You know what? I like that one. Sometimes they do. Thankfully, I work on a team that can set me straight through code reviews. But honestly, there's also good parts to it because as a consultant, my clients will sometimes come up with these ideas that are really pie in the sky. We've got to do this. We've got to have all these features. It's like, well, let's figure out if they're actually needed first and get some analytics to support you spending more money to build this stuff. So I think it kind of goes both ways. It can be helpful, sometimes a little harmful, but it doesn't affect my work that much. One more question. Guys, leave me hanging with the last question. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.